Later on, I learned from my mother that it was indeed that police classmate of my sister who had reported upon her so that he could gain the 30,000 yuan reward. After he alerted the authorities, police officers from Chengdu and Mianyang worked together and launched a blanket search for my sister, while I was trying to find a place for her to go. My sister left the bar in early morning and stored her luggage in the train station as the train wouldn't leave until late at night. She decided to utilize her spare time to visit several classmates in Chengdu whom she dared not meet before. She wanted to say farewell and tell them about Falun Gong and why it was being persecuted. But alas, she ended up being caught on the bus before she ever saw any of her classmates. And this was reported in great detail by the Rule of Law newspaper in Mianyang. Local police celebrated my sister's arrest as a big achievement since she was on the national wanted list, so they boasted about themselves in every detail in the newspaper. I couldn't imagine how many police officers they had deployed in order to catch my sister in a big city with a population of more than 10 million. How did they manage to locate her while she was just randomly on the bus without any previous plan? As far as I know, she didn't have a cell phone with her either, which might have been used to trace her. I could never figure this out. Several days later, I arrived in Taiyuan alone. The friend who waited for me there still took me to Mountain Wutai, a famous Buddhist site according to our initial plan. Standing on top of the mountain, thinking about my sister, who should have been there together with me, looking at the sacred Buddhist site being turned into a chaotic tourist destiny, and listening to the sutras chanting played with cassette recorders in the shop that sold travel souvenirs, I was suddenly overwhelmed by a tremendous feeling of sadness and sorrow. I couldn't help but cry. Deep within my heart, I suddenly felt connected with a poet of more than 1,000 years ago who wrote this famous piece. Before me, where have all the sages of Yun gone? Behind me, where are their successors? Tell me, my friend, O heaven and earth, how boundless and without end. I'm alone. Down my cheeks, tears keep rolling on. Yet, the irony and sadness was, while ancient and sacred Buddhist temples and sutras could be traded for money 1,000,000 times, genuine cultivators of Buddha principles were not even allowed to exist in the vast space between heaven and earth. However, while I was feeling extremely concerned for my sister, I had never realized that the moment when my father pushed me out of the door would be the last time that I would ever set my eyes upon him. 4 months later, I was lucky enough to be able to escape to Australia and formally begin another stage of my life in exile. With the help of local Falun Gong practitioners, I settled down quickly and continued to write my autobiography, Witnessing History, One Woman's Fight for Freedom and Falun Gong, to expose the atrocious CCP's persecution of Falun Gong. The book was translated into English by the biggest publisher in Australia, distributed worldwide, and raised a lot of attention internationally as the first book written by a labor camp survivor since the crackdown of Falun Gong began. Several years later, Newtown Dynasty TV, the largest independent global Chinese language television network, co-produced a documentary called Free China, It Courage to Believe, with me as one of the main characters. This film won numerous international awards after its release, and I was invited to many cities and countries to give speeches. Because of all this, I received a lot of media coverage. As a result, my parents in Mianyang also received extra attention from the National Security Bureau. In the beginning, the National Security Police only invited my parents to tea regularly. Later on, they gave them more pressure by asking them to go abroad to convince me into returning to China to take a look and see how great the motherland had turned out to be. I'm aware that when the Falun Gong practitioner returns, they will force him or her into revealing as much information as possible about overseas Falun Gong practitioners. Ultimately, the returned practitioner becomes a spy for them thereafter. Once, before the Mid-Autumn Festival, a time when Chinese families traditionally come together, the director of the National Security Bureau in Mianyang even personally sought my mother for a discussion. He said to her that they sincerely invited me back to China and would ensure my safety. He even said that he could write a guaranteeing statement and give it to my mother. They were actually still forcing her to contact me to pass on their invitation. The police writing a guaranteeing statement to me? I didn't know whether I should laugh or cry. When I was detained in the labor camp, they nearly tortured us to death in order to force us to give up our beliefs by writing a guaranteeing statement that we would not practice Falun Gong. Now, they want to write a guarantee to me? If they were really willing to guarantee my safety, why don't they just release all the countless imprisoned Falun Gong practitioners in China? Why are they still committing the inhumane crime of killing Falun Gong practitioners on demand for their organs? Even the Nazi regime has never done such a thing as forcefully mass harvesting human organs to be used as merchandise for profit. This brutality has gone far beyond any normal human's imagination. The police writing a guaranteeing statement for me? No way. I asked my mother to tell them sorry, but I don't think I will go back. When the police heard this, they forgot to put on their disguise and viciously threatened my mother. If she refused to come back this time, never dream about coming back again. Most of the time, it was my mother who warded off the police harassment. I learned from my mother that father always had only one sentence for the police when they asked me to go back to China. The time is not right yet. Every time when I called home, it was always my mother who answered the phone, whilst my father seldom talked with me. When he did talk, he always simply said that he was fine and asked me not to worry about him. However, I learned from my mother that he was not doing very well. His blood pressure went up again. He had cataract in his eyes and his eyesight had turned very bad. Sometimes, when he tried to fill his cup, he poured the water outside of the cup as he couldn't see clearly. In August 2014, after being separated from my father for more than 13 years, I suddenly heard that he was in a very critical condition and had been sent to the hospital with heart and respiratory failure. While the entire family was feeling extremely worried and helpless, police officers lost no time to appear at the hospital and said to my mother in a tone as if they had just won a big war, "Need your eldest daughter to come back? Well, we can still offer help." Offering help? Several years ago, When I went to the Chinese consulate in Sydney for some attestation service, instead of offering the service, the officer gave me a pile of documents and asked me to write down details, including all my Falun Gong activities in Australia, as well as all the information I knew about other Falun Gong practitioners. After I did what they wanted, they would then stamp the documents for me. Faced with this kind of scampish blackmail, what could I do except walk away? So if I really asked for help this time, wouldn't they give me a thicker pile of paper sheets? On October 27, 2014, my father passed away after living in misery for many years. When he departed from this world, none of his 3 daughters were able to be around him. I wept silently in a faraway and foreign land. When my father's situation deteriorated rapidly, I once wanted very much to rush to the Chinese consulate to see if I could get a visa to return to China. However, my supervisor stopped me and said that he didn't think my father would want to see me return and put myself in danger. And the police didn't even spare my parents when my father was dying, as they thought that would be the best opportunity to force me back. Being pushed by them into a corner, my mother clenched her teeth and said, "Don't push us. We don't need her to come back. After her father dies, I will just incinerate the body and then sprinkle the ashes into the river. If she has filial piety, he can try to remember her father in her heart. If she has no filial piety, that is also fine. We don't need her back." Mother's ruthless words really hurt my heart. But what could I say? Under the ruthless CCP regime, if my mother were not tough enough, how could she survive all the atrocities that could have killed her many times over otherwise? After more than 1 month, I still couldn't get over my grief and regret. I was extremely upset that I couldn't be at his side when he was dying. I was even more upset that I had not tried hard enough to persuade him to take up Falun Gong again, as I knew that the home phone was tapped. I was afraid that if I did, I would bring more trouble to him. As it happened, on the night before he passed away, I had been still planning that I would overcome my fear the next day and ask him to take up Falun Gong again for his health. However, early the next morning, the first thing I learned about was his death. If he had resumed his practice of Falun Gong, I'm sure that he would not pass away like this. I didn't know how I could make up for all the losses. Finally, I thought about something, which was to publish a declaration on his behalf to quit from the CCP at the Epoch Times Quit the CCP website. Although he had told me before that he had already withdrawn from the party, I was not sure how he did it. Therefore, I thought it was necessary for me to publish a declaration on his behalf. I sincerely believe that people's souls live beyond their physical bodies and they will go to other dimensions. Therefore, it was necessary to help my father to clear the mark of beast left on him by the CCP, as he was once a CCP member. This was also perhaps the only thing I could do for him at this stage. It really pained my heart to think that my dear father, who was once so talented, so upright, and so kind-hearted, died in such miserable circumstances. He was even denied the chance to see his daughters on his deathbed. Wasn't all of this caused by the CCP? I was very confident that my father's soul would want me to declare his wish to cut any lasting ties with the party. On November 29, 2014, I published the following declaration on behalf of my father at the Quit the CCP site on the Epoch Times website. As I was still very upset because of my father's death, I could only write a very simple and therefore not satisfactory declaration. Quit the CCP declaration for my late father Jiang Shengzhi. My late father Jiang Shengzhi once practiced Falun Gong, but was forced to give up because of the CCP's persecution. He died of illness recently after suffering miserably for many years. The practice of Falun Gong once benefited my father greatly, and he looked at least 10 years younger because of it. It was impossible to know how many people like my father have been killed, either directly or indirectly, by the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong. Although my father had chosen to withdraw from the CCP before, he had not published his declaration at the Epoch Times website. Hence, I hereby solemnly declare on his behalf that he would like to quit the CCP and its related organizations, and I do believe that his soul in heaven would like to see me doing this for him. Jiang Shengzhi's eldest daughter, Zeng. I had always wanted to write something to commemorate my father, but always hesitated, as I didn't know where to start. In April 2015, the number of people who have published their declaration to withdraw from the CCP and its related organizations exceeded 200 million. To celebrate this occasion, the Epoch Times launched a composition competition and called for article submissions. I thought to myself, let me commemorate my father while participating in this competition. Apart from this, I couldn't think of any better way. Therefore, I wrote this long article in tears.